The Shulchan Aruch in Simon Kuf Yud Daled in the Orchaim edition, in Halacha Aleph states, Matchalin lomar bebracha shniya, we begin to say in the second blessing of Shemona Esrei, which is the resurrection blessing, Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem. We need to say Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem, but when does one begin saying it? B'tefilat Musav Shal Yom Tov Ha'acharon Shal Chag. You need to begin saying Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem in the Musaf prayer on the last day of the holiday of Sukkot, which means to say on Shmini Chag Atzeret. Ve'en poskin ad tefilat Musav Shal Yom Tov Harishon Shal Pesach. When do we stop saying Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem? That's until the Musaf prayer of the first day of Pesach. So what the Shulchan Aruch is saying is like this, that when it comes to the blessing of the Shemona Esrei in the Techiyat HaMetim blessing, in the second blessing, when do we begin saying Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem? That's in the Tefilat Musav of Shmini Chag Atzeret. That means to say, on Shmini Chag Atzeret in Shacharit, you're still going to say Morid Atal. However, once you switch to Musav, you're going to say Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem. Once you start saying Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem from Shmini Chag Atzeret of Musaf and on, when do you stop saying it? You stop saying it in Musav of the first day of Pesach, which means to say that on the first day of Pesach in Shacharit, you are still saying Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem. But once you start davening on the first day of Yom Tov of Pesach, Musav, you no longer are allowed to say Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem, but rather we switch over there to saying Morid Hatal. Now, to better understand this halakha, if we look into Masechet Tanit in Daf Bet Amur Aleph, the Gemara says, "Me'emotai maskirin givurat gishamim." From when does one mention givurot gishamim? Rashi says on the spot, what does it mean givurot gishamim? What does it mean the power of rain? Shomer Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem. That when does one say Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem, that Hashem, you make the wind blow and you bring down the rain? From when does one mention this? But before we even answer this question, Rashi on the spot asks, what's with the language of Givurot Gishamim? Why couldn't the Mishnah just begin Me'emotai Maskirin Gishamim? When does one mention the rain? Meaning, when does one say Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem? Why does the Gemara have to go out of its way and say Me'emotai Me'eskirin Givurot Gishamim? Why the word Givura? So Rashi says, because the Gemara explains that since rain comes down with power, that's why the Mishnah says Me'emotai Maskirin Givurot Gishamim. It could have easily said Me'emotai Maskirin Gishamim, yes, but since rain comes down with the power of Hashem, that's why the Mishnah began with saying Me'emotai Maskirin Givurot Geshamim. Now that we know that, continues the Gemara and it asks, Me'emotai Maskirin Givurot Geshamim. From when does one mention the power of rain? Meaning to say, from when does one mention Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem? So there is a three-way machloket. There is an opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, there is another opinion of Rabbi Yehoshua, and there's also another opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, and we paskin like Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara says, Rabbi Eliezer says, Mi Yom Tov Harishon Shal Chag. Rabbi Eliezer holds that when does one mention Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem? On the first day of Sukkot. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, not on the first day. Mi Yom Tov Acharon Shal Chag. No, you have to mention on the last day of the holiday. Amar Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, he says, I don't understand. How can you tell me I am allowed to go out and mention Mashiv Aruch Umorid Geshem on the first day of Sukkot? We know the rule that rain is a curse on Sukkot. So why should he mention it? Rashi says, where do we learn out this concept that if it rains on Sukkot, it's a bad sign? It's a curse. So Rashi says, if you look into Masechet Sukkah, and Daf Chav Chet Amud Bet, he says over there, Me'emotai mutar lefanot. When is one able to leave his Sukkah? Mishitisrecha mikpa. He brings down over there once the congealed food becomes spoiled. So he gives a parable. He says, it's a parable to a slave or a servant that came to pour his master a cup of wine, v'shafach lo kiton al panav, and he took the pitcher and he spilled it back in the face of the slave. Ve'amrle, and he said to him, this is what the master was really saying to the slave. I don't want you to serve me. Kolomer, meaning to say, what does this have to do with the rain on Sukkot? When the rain comes down into the sukkah, everybody comes out. And it seems Hashem doesn't want us to serve before him. If that is the case, so why should I mention Masiv Aruch Umorid Ageshim on the first day of Sukkot? Doesn't make sense. It looks that you are davening to Hashem that he should bring rain on the holiday of Sukkot. But how can you tell me I want the rain to come on the holiday of Sukkot if it clearly says in Masechet Sukkah on page Chavchet Amud Bet that if rain comes down on Sukkot, it's a siman klala. It's a curse. It's not a good thing. So why should I mention it? So the Gemara continues and it says like this. Amala Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, since rain in Sukkot is only a curse, why would he want me to mention on the first day of Sukkot that the rain should come down? Amala Rabbi Eliezer said to Rabbi Yeshua, what are you talking about? Who told you I wanted to come down? What I was saying is like this. I never asked you to request for rain. All I ask you is to mention the rain in its proper time. Now this needs a little bit of explanation. There is a difference between asking for rain versus mentioning rain. When do we ask for rain? Whenever you see the language lish'ol, it means to literally ask. When do you ask? You are only allowed to ask from HaKadosh Baruch Hu only in the middle berachot. We know in Shemona Esrei that when you're davening Shemona Esrei, the first three berachot are all praises to Hashem. The last three berachot are all thanks to Hashem. The middle berachot are all asking for what we need, our needs. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer son Rabbi Yeshua, one second he says, Rabbi Yeshua, I never told you to ask for rain. Meaning to, because you guys have to remember, whenever we start saying Masiv Aruch Umorid Ageshim, in which bracha are we mentioning it in? It's mentioning. You're not asking. That's what it's called. That's what the Gemara says. Me'motai maskirin gevorat geshmim. When do we mention? Nobody's speaking about asking for rain. We're speaking about just mentioning. Over here, Rabbi Eliezer tells Rabbi Yeshua, we are mentioning the rain just like a person mentions Techiyat HaMeitim. Meaning to say that we are praising Hashem that he has this kind of strength to be able to bring down rain. And whenever we're going to need it, Hashem will bring it down. So that's what Rabbi Eliezer says. Look, you can go ahead and start saying Masiv Aruch Umorid Ageshim from the first day of Sukkot because you're not asking for rain. You are only mentioning rain. And mentioning rain is not a problem at all. All I'm doing is praising him. Where would be the problem? If I would have asked for rain, where do we ask for rain? In the blessing of Birkat Hashanim, as we'll see in Siman Kuf Yuzan in Halach Aleph in or Chaim edition. Over there, the halacha says when you have to start asking for rain. What does it mean asking for rain? We say V'ten talumatar in the blessing of Birkat Hashanim, in the yearly blessing in the Shemona Esrei. So comes Rabbi Eliezer and says to Rabbi Yeshua, what is the whole big deal over here? I never told you to ask for rain. All I'm telling you is mention the rain. Just praise Hashem that he has this power that he's able to bring rain down. And Be'ezrat Hashem, when we're going to need rain after Sukkot, Hashem is going to bring the rain. What is the problem? And that's what the Gemara is saying. Amar Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Eliezer, since rain on the holiday of Sukkot is a curse, why is he mentioning it? So over here, Rabotai, we have to understand, right now we're understanding that the word maskir over here literally means to ask. So that's why Rabbi Yeshua has a question on Rabbi Eliezer. However, comes Rabbi Eliezer and he says, Amar Rabbi Eliezer says back to Rabbi Yeshua, 1 second. I never told you to ask for rain because I know it's a siman klala. I know it's a sign of a curse. All I said that you should mention Masiv Aruch Umorid Ageshim be'onoto whenever you're going to need the rain, it's going to come in its proper time, meaning after Sukkot. Amr lo, so what did Rabbi Yeshua say to Rabbi Lezer? Im ken lo olam yamaskir. So therefore, Rabbi Yeshua said to Rabbi Lezer, if that is the case, according to you that this is only a praise, so why don't we mention it all year long? And Rashi on the spot says, why do we have to stop on Pesach, like we saw in the halakha? So the Gemara answers and he says, "En sholim et hageshamim ela samuch legeshamim." You should request the rain only close to the rain season. Meaning, look, you're right. If I wanted to, I could have said Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem all year long because it's a praise. But what? It's preferable to mention Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem closer to the rain season. So, Rabotai, now we see over here that one opinion is Rabbi Eliezer, another opinion is Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Eliezer holds, when does one begin saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem? On the first day of Sukkot. Rabbi Yehoshua holds, when does one begin saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem? On the last day of Sukkot. However, comes Rabbi Yehuda, and we follow halacha like Rabbi Yehuda. He comes and he says, you're going to start saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem on the last day of Sukkot, just like the opinion of Rabbi Yeshua, but it's a little bit different. Rabbi Yeshua in the Mishnah holds that you start saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem on Shmini Chag Atzeret, but in Shacharit. Rabbi Yehuda says, no, you're going to say it in Musaf. So let's see that inside. Rabbi Yehuda says, Ha'over lefnei ha'teva biyom tov acharon shel Chag. One who goes before the teva on the last day of the holiday, mina Shmini Chag Atzeret. What does it mean, Ha'over lefnei ha'teva? What does it mean, one who goes before the teva? The teva is the Aron HaKodesh. So Rabbi Yehuda says, Ha'over lefnei ha'teva, you're going to say, one who goes before the Aron HaKodesh, biyom tov ha'acharon shel Chag, on the last day of Shmini Chag Atzeret, ha'acharon maskir. Listen to what he says. The last guy is going to mention Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem. When we say ha'acharon, it means the guy who's davening Musaf. Harishon eno maskir, but the shalich tzibur, who's davening Shacharit, he's not going to yet mention Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem, and that is the difference between him and Rabbi Yehoshua. Beyond Harishon shel Pesach, but when it comes to the first day of Pesach, Harishon Maskir, the first guy who's going to be davening Chazan, Shacharit, he's going to mention Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem. Ha'acharon Eino Maskir. However, the last guy who's going to be davening Musaf, he's not going to mention Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem. Now that we have this, let's go back and see the halacha. So we are in Simon Kuf Yudalad in halacha Aleph in Orach Chaim. The halacha states, Matchelin lomar bebercha shniya. We begin to say in the second blessing of the Shemona Esrei, which is the Techiyat HaMetim blessing, Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem. B'tefilat Musaf shel Yom HaAcharon shel Chag. In the Musaf prayer on the last day of the holiday of Sukkot, which is going to be Shmini Chag Atzeret. Ve'en poskin, and one does not stop from saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem, ad tefilat Musaf shel Yom Tov HaRishon shel Pesach, until the Musaf prayer of the first day of Pesach, which means to say, Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem, we begin saying in Musaf of Shmini Chag Atzeret. And when do we stop saying Masiv Haruch U'Morid Geshem? On the first day of Pesach in the Musaf prayer. So we clearly see that the halach is like Rabbi Yehuda from Masechet Tanit in Daf Bet Amud Aleph. Now we're going to go to another siman where it also is like the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. In siman Kuf Yud Zayin in Orach Chaim, in halacha Aleph, it states like this: Birkat HaShanim, when it comes to the yearly blessing, meaning to say when you are found in Barech Aleinu, Tzarich lomar ba biyemot hageshamim, you need to say in the Birkat HaShanim blessing, V'ten tal umatar. This is what Rabbi Lezer was telling Rabbi Yehoshua. This is called sho'alim. This is where you are requesting for rain to come down. So we see from over here, when it comes to maskirin, it's in the blessing of Techiyat HaMetim. When it comes to sho'alim, it's in the blessing of Birkat HaShanim. So that's what the Shulchan Aruch says over here. In Simon Kuf Yud Zayin in Halacha Aleph, Birkat HaShanim. When one is found in the blessing of Birkat HaShanim, Tzarich lomar ba biyemot hageshamim, you need to say Birkat HaShanim in the rainy season, V'ten tal umatar. You need to say over there, V'ten tal umatar, that you Hashem give us dew and rain. Now, when do you begin saying V'ten tal umatar? Umatchilin lish'ol matar b'chutz la'aretz. We begin to ask for rain outside of the land of Israel. B'tefilat aravit, in the evening prayer. Shel yom samach achar tukufat tishrei. On the 60th day, after the period or season of Tishrei, v'yom ha'tikuva hu bichlal hasamach, and the tikuva period is included in the 60-day count. Now, just to give you a eye-burst view and how to understand, we all know we have 4 seasons. We have fall, winter, spring, and summer. In the Jewish calendar, you also have the same thing. You have 4 seasons. One of them is called Tekufa Tishrei. So put it to you like this. Tekufa Tishrei is the fall season. Tekufa Tevet is the winter season. Tekufa Nisan is the spring. Tekufa Tammuz is the summer season. So it comes out to be like this, that after the fall season, once the fall season begins, 60 days later, then you start beginning to mention in the Aravit prayer, Ten Tal Umatar, in the blessing of Birkat HaShanim. All this is outside of the land of Israel. Be'eretz Israel, however, when you are dealing with the land of Israel, people that live in Eretz Israel, Matchilin Lish'om Milal Zayin B'Mar Cheshvan. You begin to ask from the night of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. So we see over here that when it comes to people living outside of Israel versus people living inside of Israel, it's 2 different times when they begin to start asking for rain by saying V'ten tal umatar in Birkat HaShanim. If you live outside of the land of Israel, you start asking 60 days after the Tukufa Tishrei. If you live in Israel, you start beginning to ask V'ten tal umatar in Birkat HaShanim from the night of the 7th of Mar Cheshvan. Now the Shulchan Aruch is going to go ahead and he's going to say, now that we know when we begin saying V'ten tal umatar, everyone according to where they live, now the Shulchan Aruch is going to tell you up to when can you say V'ten tal umatar. So he says over here, V'sho'alin, you are able to ask for rain ad tefilat mincha shel erev Yom Tov harishon shel Pesach, until the afternoon prayer of erev Yom Tov of the first day of Pesach. Umisham uve'elach poskin milishol. From there and on, we stop from asking for rain. So, by the way, this applies to everyone. Doesn't matter where you live. In Israel, outside of Israel, doesn't matter. The Shulchan Aruch says like this. When it comes to stopping from asking for rain, the last time you're going to say V'ten tal umatar, it's going to be in the mincha prayer of Erev Yom Tov of the first day of Pesach. There you're going to say one more time V'ten tal umatar. Now in Aravit it's already Yom Tov Rishon. You're not saying V'ten tal umatar. Also on Cholomod you could no longer say, because the last time you were allowed to say V'ten tal umatar was in the afternoon prayer, meaning in the mincha prayer of Erev Yom Tov of the first day of Pesach. And it's similar to what Rabbi Yehuda wanted to say when it came to stopping from mentioning Masiv Haruk Mored Geshem. What did Rabbi Yehuda say in the Gemara? You have to stop from saying Masiv Haruk Mored Geshem in the Musaf prayer of the first day of Pesach. So it comes out over here, the guy that's going up, the Shalich Tzibur that's going before the Arna Kodesh for Shacharit is still going to say Masiv Haruk Mored Geshem. But when it comes to Musaf of Yom Tov Rishon Shel Pesach, Rabbi Yehuda says over there he can no longer say Masiv Haruk U'Morid Hageshem. Now we're going to move on to another topic, because the Gemara Masechet Ta'anit brought down, it said over there, Maskirin Givurat Geshamim B'tchet Amitim. You mention the strength of the rain or the power of the rain in the resurrection of the dead blessing. V'shoalim b'berkat hashanim, and you have to ask for the rain in the yearly blessing. V'havdalah b'chonen hada'at, and the Gemara says you have to say the separation blessing in chonen hada'at. So if we look into the Shulchan Aruch in Siman Reish Tzadik Dalet, in Orach Chaim edition, in Halach Aleph, the Shulchan Aruch states, Omrim havdalah b'chonen hada'at. We say havdalah in chonen hada'at. V'im ta'av v'lo hivdil. What happens if a person made a mistake and he forgot to say Havdalah in Chonen Da'at, Mashlim Tifilato ve'eno chozer. You have to complete your prayer and you're not allowed to go back and correct yourself. Why? Because you need to go ahead and still do Havdalah on a cup of wine. However, Rabotai, the next halacha in halacha aleph is very important. Ve'im ta'am kodem shehivdil alakos. If you tasted something before you did Havdalah on a cup of wine, tarich lachzor u'lavdil b'tefillah. You need to go back and you need to do Havdalah in the Shemona Esrei, meaning you need to go back and you need to redaven Shemona Esrei. Now we're going to move on to another important topic in Masechet Tanit Daf Bet Amur Aleph, where the Gemara says, "Me'matai maskirin givorot geshamim." So we said, according to Rabbi Yehuda, let's stay with the halakha. According to Rabbi Yehuda, you have to start mentioning Mashiv Aruch Morid Ageshim and Shmini Chag Atzeret in the Musaf prayer. Then the Gemara went on to say, where do you mention it? The Gemara said, "Umaskerin givorat geshamim b'tichat emitim." You need to mention Mashiv Aruch Morid Ageshim in the blessing of the resurrection of the dead. The Gemara asks a question. 1 second. One second. From where did we understand, or from where did we get this notion that I have to specifically mention Mashiv Aruch Morid Ageshim in prayer, meaning in the Shemona Esrei? Why can't I just say it outside while I'm not davening Shemona Esrei, just like I do with any other prayer? Why does it have to be specifically in the Shemona Esrei? So the Gemara answers the time like it was taught in the Braita. It says in the Torah, "La'ahava et Hashem Elokechem," to love Hashem your God, u'le'avdo b'chol levavchem, and to serve Him with all your heart. The Gemara asks a question: Eizo hi avodah shi balev? What is the service that is in the heart? Because the pasuk in the Torah states, if you look into Devarim Perek Yud Aleph pasuk Yud Gimel, it says over there, "V'hayim shemo tishmeu el mitzotai," and if you're going to listen to my mitzvot, "Asher anochi mitzaveh etchem hayom," that I command you today, "La'ahava et Hashem Elokechem," to love Hashem your God, "U'le'avdo b'chol levavchem," and to serve Him with all your heart, "U'v'chol nafshechem," and with all your soul. 1 second, the Gemara asks a question. When you say these words, "U'le'avdo b'chol levavchem," that I have to serve Hashem with all my heart, the Gemara says, 1 second, what does that mean? Avodah shebalev. What does that mean? I have to serve Hashem with all my heart. Ezuhi avodah shebalev. What is that service which is in the heart that you are telling me I have to serve Hashem with all my heart? So the Gemara says, "Have omer zot tefillah." I'll tell you that this is going on tefillah. Whenever you see the language of u'avdo b'chol levavchem, to serve Hashem with all your heart, it means in the tefillah prayer. That's what it means. U'avdo b'chol levavchem is going on the tefillah. And the Rambam, he codifies this law in his Sefer Ahava and Hilchot Tefillah in Perek 1, Halacha 1. Let me read what he says. Mitzvat aseh litpalel b'chol yom. There is a positive commandment to pray every single day. How do we know? Shenemar, because it says in the pasuk, "Ve'avodetem et Hashem Elokechem," and you should serve Hashem your God. Mipi Hashemu u'lamdu, we learned out from tradition, she'avodah zuhi tefillah, that this avodah that it says in the pasuk that you need to serve Hashem, you know what it means you need to serve Hashem is going on the prayer. How do I know? Shenemar, because it states in the Torah, in Sefer Devarim, in Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Gimel, it says over there, "U'avdo b'chol levavchem." You should serve Hashem with all your heart. Amru Chacham, the rabbis of blessed memory, they said, "Eizo hi avodah shebalev." What is this tefillah that you tell me that it's in the heart, that you want me to serve Hashem with my heart? What does that mean? So he says, you know what that is? Zot tefillah, that is the Shemona Esrei prayer. Now the Rambam is going to conclude and he's going to tell us, this that I have to daven every single day, 3 times a day, that's not from the Torah. The text that I have to say every single day, that's also not from the Torah. And the fixed times that the rabbis put for us, for Shacharit, Mincha, and Arvit, That's also not from the Torah. So let's see that. The Rambam continues and he says, Ve'en minyan tefillot min Torah. The number of prayers is not prescribed in the Torah. You want to daven one time, daven one time. You want to daven 10 times, daven 10 times. There's no prescribed number in the Torah. Ve'en mishnei tefillah zot min Torah. Nor does it prescribe a specific formula for prayer. You could say it with your own words. That's from the Torah. Ve'en letefillah zman kavu min Torah. And so too, according to the Torah law, there are no fixed time for prayers. You could daven in the morning, afternoon, or even in the evening. However, Rabotai, all this is according to the Rambam and from the Torah. But when it comes to our Chacham, like the Shulchan Aruch Paskins, we have an obligation to daven every single day, 3 times a day. Even though the Arevit prayer is optional, it became like an obligation on us. We have to say the text that the rabbis have instituted. And also we have to follow the Shulchan Aruch where it says that it gave us the fixed time up to when you can daven Shacharit, up to when you can daven Mincha, and also up to when you can daven Arevit. So in any event, back to our question in the Gemara. The Gemara asked a question, how do we know that the mentioning of Mashiv, Haruch, Umrit, Geshem needs to be in the Tefillah? So the Gemara said, Uminalam de Tefillah, how do we know that it's supposed to be mentioned in the Shemona Esrei? The Gemara answers, the time like was taught in the Baraita, La'ahavayt Hashem Elokechem ul'avdo b'chol levavchem, to love Hashem your God and to serve Him with all your heart. The Gemara asks a question, Ezo hi avodah shi b'lev? What is that service of the heart? How do you serve Hashem with the heart? The Gemara says, Have omer zot tefillah. I'll tell you, this is tefillah like the Rambam codified it in the Sefer Ahava in Hilchat Tefillah in Perek Aleph, Halacha Aleph. Now we're going to see how do we know that Mashiv, Haruch, Umrit, Geshem needs to be said in the Shemona Esrei. Uketiv batein, right after this verse of La'ahavayt Hashem Elokechem u'lavdo b'chol levavchem, right after that verse, it's written, Ve'natati matar artechem, and I gave rain to your lands, Bi'ito in its time, Yoreh u'malkosh, the earlier rain, and the later rain. Now, if you look into Sefer Devarim, in Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yud Gimel, and also in Sefer Devarim, Perek Yud Aleph, Pasuk Yud Dalet, these 2 pasukim of Ul'avdo et Hashem b'chol levavchem, and at the same time, V'natati matar artechem, those 2 pasukim are next to each other. Why are they next to each other? Why is the pasuk of rain, which is found in Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Dalet in Sefer Devarim, next to the pasuk of La'ahavayt Hashem Elokechem u'lavdo b'chol levavchem, which is in Perek Yud Aleph, pasuk Yud Gimel? Why are they next to each other? You know what the Gemara is telling us? It's coming to teach you that the rain must be mentioned in the Shemona Esrei. So when the Gemara asks a question, how do I know Mashiv, Haruch, Morid, Ageshim has to be said in the Shemona Esrei? Why can't it be said outside of the Shemona Esrei? The Gemara answers, because you have a pasuk which says, Ul'avdo b'chol levavchem, which is going on Shemona Esrei, because that is the tefillah. How do you serve Hashem? That is through Shemona Esrei. But at the same time, right after that, it's written, V'natati matar artechem bi'ito yoreh u'malkush, that I gave you rain to your land at its time, the early rain and the later rain. So we see the fact that you have the rain mentioned next to the pasuk of Ulavdo b'chol levavchem, you should learn from here that Mashiv, Haruch, Umrit, Geshem must be mentioned in the Shemona Esrei blessing.